So, most welcome to all of you. Again, very happy to be with you in this virtual assembly. So we are getting together again for continuing our discussion on Raga-vartma-candrika, the moon ray which illuminates, sheds lights on the path of Raga Bhakti, the path of sacred, passionate love. So today it's our meeting number 15. And we will continue studying verse number 14 from this first part, first illumination of Raga-vartma-candrika. Today is our second session where we are studying verse 14. In our previous meeting, we started with verse 13, which is but an introduction to what will be presented in detail in verse 14. So we will make some brief recap of what we were studying in our previous lecture before starting with today's topic. So first of all, Vishwanath in verse 13 presented 5 divisions of practice in the context of Raga Bhakti. After mentioning the main angis of Raga Bhakti and so on, he kind of subdivided them in another fashion, another presentation, considering one may ask this question: which limbs of bhajan are to be practiced, how many types, what are their attributes, what's to be adopted, what's to be rejected, continuing with the idea of what Rupa Goswami enumerated in his 64 angas of bhakti. He spoke a little bit about certain practice to be cautious of and things like this. So he mentioned fivefold in presentation of Raga Bhajan. First of all, he mentioned Svabhishta Bhavamai, which means saturated with one's cherished mood. Then he spoke about Svabhishta Bhava Sambandhi, something that is related to one's cherished mood. Svabhishta Bhava Anukul, something which will be favorable to one's cherished mood. Svabhishta Bhava Aviruddha, which means something that is neutral or not opposed to one's cherished mood. And finally, Svabhishta Bhava Viruddha, which means something which will be actually detrimental to one's desired mood, what one wants to attain through the path of Raga. So he mentioned that in these 5 categories, some of them will be fit the label of being both practice and goal, sadhya, sadhana. Some will be considered direct cause, upadana karana, for attaining the goal. Some will be considering direct cause, nimitta karana, sometimes called instrumental cause, and different ways of describing all these. Some are symptoms of bhajan, helpful, neutral, detrimental. All this will be unfolded in the eventual section of this next verse, 14th verse. So we started with the 14th verse in our previous lecture, which is a further elaboration of what Vishwanath presented in the 13th verse. So we started by speaking about the first 2 of these 5 categories that he presented. So the first one, which was Svabhishta Bhavamai, saturated with one's cherished mood, he defined that first by referring it to those devotional feelings of servitude, fraternity, parenthood, amorous love, dasya, sakya, vatsalya, madhurya. Those feelings are considered actually Svabhishta Bhavamai. Or the point is, Svabhishta Bhavamai refers to having some greed for some particular mood, basically. That would all the other things begin. According to the particular mood I am after, some things will be favorable to that mood, some things will be neutral, unfavorable, related. But first of all, we have to establish what's a particular mood in itself, because if not, we cannot further elaborate on that. So first comes this Svabhishta Bhavamai, which refers to having actual greed, speaking here in the context of Raga Bhakti, for some particular cherished mood in Braj. And then will come the remaining 4 categories. The second one that Vishwanath presented then, it's Bhava Sambandhi, which means refers to engaging in certain practices, or in those practices, basically, which will quickly give that mood, which will be sambandhi, which will be related to that mood. So we have described that, and we will be continuing today. And next classes will continue with this second part. Still, we won't go to 3rd, 4th, and 5th part. So then he mentioned, referring to this Bhava Sambandhi, some items of bhajan from Guru Padasraya, taking shelter of the feet of the Guru, serving him, mantra japa, meditation, all this he considered as Svavista Bhava Sambandhi, as connected to one's cherished mood, and as direct causes for attaining the goal. In the context of Bhava Sambandhi, he will speak about direct causes and indirect causes. He will create some subdivision here with the terms of Upadana Karana and Nimitta Karana. But please don't get lost with this jungle of terms. So he quotes there Radhakrishna Ganodesh Dipika to give some scriptural support to his point, mentioning how this scripture mentions the importance of the duty of chanting, of daily chanting the mantra comprised of Krishna's names, which are associated with one's cherished mood in relation to Krishna. And the japa of kirtan of those names, mantra japa, which has to do with eternal relationship with him one is aspiring to have. So all this is bhava sambandhi, that's the point. Will be a practice related to one's cherished mood. So he quotes this Ganodesh Dipika, which starts to explain the Gopal mantra, explaining the word Govinda as the lover of the cowherd ladies who pervades all of one's senses. So in that sense, he connects the name. And we spoke about how the names of this mantra, or whatever other mantra for that matter, according to one's mood, one will be inclined to invoke certain names of the divine connected to that mood. But sometimes some other names, which are more general or abstract, as we say, like Vishnu, Keshav, Madhava, Sridhar, which will be maybe connected to Narayan and Vaikuntha, may have a particular meaning according to one's cherished mood, to one's affinity. So that's also possible. So basically, after saying this, after describing the glories of the Gopal mantra, particular of the practice of mantra japa as bhava sambandhi, he mentioned that the sadhana of hearing and chanting, not only mantra japa, but here Shravan Kirtan, the nama, guna, rupa, lila, regarding to Krishna, is considered a direct cause for attaining one's desired feeling, and this is called bhava sambandhi. So again, direct cause, indirect cause, all this in the context of bhava sambandhi. And then we finished our previous lecture by Vishwanath after that quotes 2 verses from the Bhagavad to give further support to his point. First verse is from 11th canto, which speaks about wandering alone, giving up all shyness, and like a madman, basically singing songs about Krishna, glorifying his sweetness in regarding certain names and forms. So they're speaking about some specific glorification according to one's own mood. And the second verse was coming from the first canto, and there it was expressed how the devotees attain topmost bliss by constantly describing, remembering, and hearing about Krishna's attributes. So they spoke about some constant, Nityam Bhagavata Sivaya Kirtaniya Sadahari, in the concept of Shravan Kirtan Shmar. And with this, Vishnu wants to make these practices, this engagement in bhava sambandhi sadhana is obligatory, should be continuous. Those practices related to one's cherished mood, that will be of topmost important in attaining one's cherished mood, basically. And he concluded, interestingly, by reminding us how generally it was said that Smaran is the main name of Raga Bhakti, but actually in the context of what he's saying here, mentioned that even that is dependent on kirtan, and especially in this present age of Kali, kirtan grants all adhikar and eligibility for entering into the kingdom of bhajan, and all devotional margas and paths are proclaiming how this kirtan is the very best limb of bhakti. So we provided some quotes in that connection, and the importance of continually engaging in these practices. And well, that's all what we saw last class. Today we will continue with this second part, Bhava Sambandhi, Svavista Bhava Sambandhi, practices related to one's cherished mood. But now we will start speaking about indirect causes. Till now, Vishwanath spoke about direct causes, what he called Upadana Karana. And now he will go to indirect causes in the form of other practices. So I'll share with you the first part of the section we will see today. We will see a few of them, so I will share in the chat the text. There it is. So I will read it. It says like this: having performed austerities with full faith, they attained full prem and took birth in Braj. From this evidence, of Sri Ujjwal Nilamani, it is known that austerity was the cause of the Shrutis attaining Prem. Here, tapasya means fasting on holy days such as Ekadasi and Janmashtami, because in the present age of Kali, other types of austerities are condemned. The Lord has personally said, vows performed for my sake are called tapasya. Thus, fasting on holy days like Ekadasi and Janmashtami are nimitta karana, instrumental or indirect causes for enhancing one's specific devotional sentiment. Failure to perform these occasional duties is harmful, therefore, they are to be perpetually engaged in. So, first part of what we will see today, but whatever we will see today will be moving around Ekadasi and celebrations like this. Ekadasi, Janmashtami mainly, interestingly, because we are just coming from Janmashtami and tomorrow is Ekadasi, so it's quite connected to what's going on these days in our lives. So here Vishwanath is describing, is going from speaking about Swabhishta Bhava Sambandhi related practices to one's cherished mood in a direct way, like the ones we already mentioned. Now he will go to the indirect ones, or Nimitta Karna. He gives example of Ekadasi and Janmashtami, certain tapasya, devotional, tapasya in the context of bhakti, by quoting something here. So he is describing how the observance of vows, like Ekadasi, Janmashtami, are nimitta karna, which means, again, karna means cause, and nimitta here will mean indirect cause, for attaining the desired feelings. He also describes here them like occasional duties, in the sense that we are not expected to follow Ekadasi every single day or to celebrate Janmashtami every day. But whenever that happens, you should be celebrating that properly. The other difference is that Kirtan, Shravan, and so on, that's something to be done on a daily basis. In that sense, sometimes this is called permanent duties in that sense. So he begins this section by quoting Ujjwal Nilamani from Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, which is speaking about this short quote about the tapasya that was performed by the personified Shrutis in this particular case, who it is said that they attained Braj after following it, the mood of the gopis. This is a different case from that of Lakshmi, you know. She wanted to attain Vrindavan, she wanted to attain the experience of romantic love in Braj, but she didn't follow the proper methodology. So she was not able. It is said that somehow or other, it is said that she's still there in Belban, performing tapasya, following the wrong method, not being able to access such a reality. Like trying to make the point, you have to adopt the corresponding method according to the sadhya you want to attain. So here the personified Shrutis, Shruti Virbhigyan, the Shrutis personified, wanted to attain that, and they did that by following into the nanugatya, like following the wake of the feelings of the gopis. So in this way, also we have also the famous example of the Dandakaranya rishis. That's another example given sometimes, which has to do with people performing certain type of tapasya, but in the context of bhakti. They became also gopis eventually. They performed certain aradhana, certain worship, devotional worship following the footsteps of the gopis. So all these practices are called also bhava sambandhi, but in the context of indirect, because as we will see, this will converge into the direction of Ekadasi, Janmashtami, again, and so on, things that we won't do every single day. But a brief word on the concept of austerities, because that's what it's quoted here. When we speak about austerities, it's important to understand this point. Now, this is in the context of bhakti, because tapasya by itself cannot bestow bhakti, as we know. Bhakti comes from bhakti, bhaktya, sanjataya bhaktya. Bhakti comes from bhakti. Austerities in the context of bhakti, that's one thing, like what Brahma heard in the beginning of creation, tapas, these two syllables, which also mean fire, enter into the fire of meditation, basically. But the meditation was a devotional one, eventually. I mean, in the context of bhakti, there is place for certain tapasis, Guru will say, Nukulyasam kalpapratikulyasa varjanam. If something is favorable for my bhakti, I'm fasting, I'll fast because I will nourish my bhakti. But if I have to feast, and that's favorable for my bhakti, I will do that. So I will accept and reject with that consideration, topmost consideration in mind. What will nourish my bhakti the most? So here, when we are speaking about austerities, we are speaking about surrendering ourselves, basically, internally, not some external thing that some other processes may be done in yoga marg, on a jnana marg, surrounding yourself by fire in the summer or taking a very cold bath in the coldest season of winter, not eating, taking a vow of silence, mauna brat, accepting like different hardships, bodily hardships, like austere penance practices. You know, this happens. This happened mainly in other ages. That's why also Vishwanath quotes, we are in Kali now. Because in other ages, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, the disposition was different, the duration of life was different, the psychology was different, the Yuga Dharma was different. So people was engaged in these things much more. But all the things, all these austerities, as they were performed in other ages, are denounced in the present age for the people of the present age of Kali, because they are short-lived, and basically it's difficult for human beings to survive without food. To say that in other ages people were able to continue with their lives, retain their life in their life earth, in their prana, between their bones, in their brain, in a very subtle way. But in Kali Yuga, you need food. You need to put food in your stomach, and only then you will be able to survive. And life is not too long, so you cannot perform some 10,000 year tapasya to ask Brahma for some blessing or something like this that people done in other ages. So the point is for us now, austerities, for in the context of bhakti and in the context of Kali Yuga, austerities like Ekadasi Vrat are the prescribed, if you will, penance for the Vaishnavas, which if you pay attention, it's not that much. It's something twice a month, and it's in a particular context, as we will see. It's not necessarily just not doing something. So the point is that here, this quoted verse from the Ushmal Nilamani, who speaks about how the Shruti personified perform austerity, this refers to a form of bhakti, because it says they perform austerities with full faith. So that full faith term puts everything in context, basically. A devotional, Shraddha was there. So then, in the context of this section, as we saw, Vishwanath is quoting a section from the Bhagavad, where Krishna is speaking to Uddhav. I didn't mention the exact quote, but it's coming from 11th canto, chapter 29, verse 33. When the short line, not the whole verse, Krishna is saying to Uddhava, any vow performed for my sake is considered penance. So that's an interesting idea. What's tapasya for us? Again, people may have a general idea of what's tapasya, but for Krishna, his own opinion, is performing vows for his sake. He will say, Satatam kirtayam tamam yatantastat jida brata namasyantas tamam bhaktya nitya yukta upasute. He's describing how his devotees worship him after saying, Mahatmanastamam parta. He said they are constantly engaged in kirtan, Satatam kirtayantamam. That's again a direct bhava sambandhi, a direct way of culturing one's inner mood. But also, the Tantas Tadrida Brata, they are also with the great determination making sacrifice to perform certain vows, to sustain their vows. Namasyantas tamam bhaktya. They are offering pranam with bhakti. And in this way, Nitya Yukta Pachate, they are perpetually worshipping me. So here Krishna is saying, if you perform a vow for my sake means anukul bhajan, with a favorable desire of giving pleasure to the object of my affection. And this whole line will put in context our remaining explanation of Ekadasi and Janmastami and fasting and feasting and doing whatever we do. It will not be just for the sake of fasting, for the sake of whatever, not sleeping or not doing this and that, but for the sake of giving a special type of pleasure to Krishna in those particular special days, such as Janmastami, Ekadasi, and so on. So it's important to, even though it's a little line that Vishwanath is sharing here, all these elements are here there for some particular reason. And what to speak, if they are the main, very first ones, we'll put in context the remaining content. So that's tapasya for us, because also to make a vow implies to sustain the vow. We are Vaishnavas, so Vishnu is the sustainer. So we should express sustainability in our practice. Vows is not just about how we'll make a vow. You have to sustain the vow. What's the meaning of making a vow and just sustaining that for the next 5 minutes? So the real tapasya is not just making the vow, but sustaining in that on a daily basis, or engaging in that whatever is corresponding. In this case, these are occasional duties for Vaishnavas. Sometimes this may be referred as Naimitika Dharma, in contrary of Nitya Dharma. Nitya Dharma sometimes refers to things that you are expected to do as a Vaishnava on a daily basis. And Naimitika means like occasional. So you have to do that once every month, once every year, twice a month, or something like this. And in that sense, they are considered secondary or indirect, as we already mentioned. We will see that this is not to deride, to speak in a derogatory way about this, but just because it's not a daily ingredient, it's given a second position, if you will. But at the same time, they are accepted as being eternal, in the sense that, as we will see, there has to do with giving pleasure to Hari. They are connected with Hari's pleasure, which is eternal. And in that sense, they are primary. But they are secondary in the sense of we are not engaging in them on a daily basis. But we'll see how Vishwanath will present delicate consequences of not following this type of prescriptions like Ekadasi and so on in the proper way. So that speaks of their primacy as well, not only very cheaply discarding them as secondary. So these practices, again, Ekadasi, Janmashtami, and other festivities are fit into the label of nimitta karana, or indirect cause, in the context of bhava sambandhi, those items which are related to one's cherished mood. As well as the idea of performing any austerity for Krishna. Again, in some brief points that are mentioned, some other ideas are extended there. But the idea is all this will be in the context of doing this while having the greed that has been already mentioned in the context of Raga Marga. Remember, we are all at all moments speaking here about Raga Bhakti. And now we are speaking about something that is related to the cherished mood in the context of Raga Bhakti. So when Vishwanath is speaking about the Ekadasi or Janmashtami, he says, it refers to whatever austerity you perform for Krishna's sake in the context of that greed that is engaging you in some form or another of Raga Bhakti. So that's nimitta karana again. And on the other side, we have upadana karana, as I already mentioned, direct causes, like the practices we mentioned in the previous class, like hearing about pastimes of Krishna, serving Sri Guru, taking shelter in him, engaging in Nam, Kirtan, Shravan, Smaran of Nama, Rupa, Guna, Lila, and so on. So this must certainly be performed on a daily basis. If we do not perform nimitta karana at every moment, or wherever we have to perform them, it is harmful, as we'll see, if we do not follow Ekadasi and so on. But in that sense, it's not so harmful, if you will, as if we neglect the upadana karana practices altogether. But again, we will try to put that in context. With this, I'm not saying, so it's not so harmful, you can forget about that. No, it's not like this. We'll try to put this in greater and greater context. So the difference between, sometimes to further illustrate this difference between nimitta karana and upadana karana, indirect cause, sometimes Vedic language, psychology gives some analogy to that. This is the example of the potter and the earth. Without the potter and without the earth, a pot cannot be made. Now, potter will be here the nimitta karana, indirect cause, and the earth will be the upadana, the direct cause. So between the potter and the earth is especially crucial, basically, and that's why it's superior, representing, again, upadana karana. So this has to do with hearing, again, from Sri Guru, serving Gurudev, hearing Hari Katha. All this is upadana karana. And all the other practices, that's the point, are secondary in comparison. But it doesn't mean you don't have to follow. And especially the injunction that Ekadasi is secondary, for example, is secondary mainly for those persons. So we have to understand the context. Secondary mainly for those people who give stress to Ekadasi, Janmastami, following Ram Navami or whatever, but who are not hearing Harikatha, who are not chanting Harinam, who are not taking shelter in Sri Guru. For those people who are placing an excessive emphasis on Ekadasi and so on, we'll say that's secondary. No? In the case of that won't replace the main angas of our bhakti marg, especially raga marg. We are speaking about raga marg. So you won't enter Golok Vrindavan just by following Ekadasi and celebrating Janmastami, but totally neglecting Shravan, Kirtan, Shmaran, Guru Seva, and Nam Seva, and so on. That's a point. That's a context Vishwanath is trying to share here. And then Vishwanath says, basically closing this first section we are sharing today, failure to perform these occasional duties is harmful. So again, he's trying to make the point. Even though we may consider them occasional duties, indirect causes, secondary practice, whatever you may like to term them, here is saying if you fail to do that, that will be harmful to your cherished moods in Raga Bhakti. That's the harm he's referring here to. Of course, again, everything will depend on the context and the particular situation, because we could ask, well, what's the harm in neglecting Ekadasi? One thing is for us, if we are neglecting that consciously, if we are aware of that, because if you are speaking about someone who has excessive, if you will, greed, lobha, who are consumed by their passionate bhajan, and they are engaging in bhavamaya bhakti, bhava sambandhi, to such a point that she is unaware of his external surroundings on the day, on the lunar calendar, and today's Ekadasi, the person is totally absorbed. In that case, we cannot say there will be harm. But again, we are given paramount examples, like for example, I don't know, Bamsidas Babaji. There is one example with him. He was once observing Ekadasi for 3 or 4 days. So you may say, oh, but you didn't break Ekadasi today's 12. He continued. He continued following Ekadasi on Astami, on Navami, and then on Ekadasi, he was completely unaware of the day because he was totally absorbed in his internal conception. So you cannot say, oh no, that was harmful for Bamsidas Babaji. He didn't follow Ekadasi and break Ekadasi and the proper month. No. Because the point of doing this properly is to awake a particular type of bhava. And as Guru Maharaj says, when that bhava is awakened, sometimes you won't follow all these rules, not because you don't want to do it, but because you cannot. The bhava is taking over and makes you sometimes forget certain things because of excessive absorption in some other direction. But if we are not there, we cannot imitate them, and we shouldn't take that as an excuse for us to dismiss this. Raghunath Das Goswami is another example in this regard. To say that he will be also internally absorbed in remembering his different services in the context of Astakaliya, Leela, to Radha and Krishna, his internal identity as Tulsi Manjari, Rati Manjari, for many days in a row, forgetting to sleep, forgetting to eat. So Ekadasi will pass that time. He did maybe Ekadasi because he fasted totally, but maybe he never broke Ekadasi the next day. But again, we are speaking about 2 Mahavagavats who are performing the topmost limit of Raga Bhajan. So for them, there was no harm in their missing Ekadasi. But the point is, if we are missing Ekadasi, being externally conscious of that, that will be harmful for our bhakti. So that's why Vishwanath is mentioning this here. And he's further supporting his claim by giving Shastra Praman next, both in a direct way, what will happen if you follow Ekadasi, and what will happen if you don't follow Ekadasi. So we will continue with the next section of this 14th verse or prose from this first part of Raga-vartma-candrika. I will share that in the chat. 1 minute, it's too long. So I will share that in 2 parts, because it's too long to share in only one part via chat. That's the first one. Here it goes, the second one. So I'll read it. It says like this. So here Vishwanath is further pounding the post with Shastra Pramana, his classical example, and not only his classical example, but that what is expected in the circle of Vaishnavas. If you want to make a point, you have to back that, support that with Shastra Pramana. So he says here, in the Smriti Shastra, the effect of observing Ekadasi is told. So he quotes, fasting on Ekadasi causes the remembrance of Govinda. On the basis of this evidence, we can see that observing vows such as those pertaining to holy days like Ekadasi and Janmashtami leads to attaining Smaran or remembrance, which is Upadana Karana, the cause for attaining one's desired mode. Therefore, such vows are considered to be partial bhava sambandhi. On the other hand, it is said about not observing it. One who does not observe the Ekadasi Vrat attains the sins of killing his mother, father, brother, and guru. In this way, the Skanda Purana says that one who does not fast on Ekadasi becomes a killer of his guru and commits an offense against the holy name. It is also written in the Vishnu Dharmakara that while the scriptures offer various means of atonement for crimes such as killing a Brahman and drinking liquor, kidnapping, and harboring lusty desires for the wife of one's spiritual master, there are no penances that can eradicate the sin incurred by taking grains on Ekadasi. All these denouncing statements prove that vows like Ekadasi should always be kept. Shri Ekadasi ki jai. Hopefully none of you is afraid of the later statements here. We will try to explain them in certain context. But before, one clarification here. Again, the term Ekadasi is not only limited to Ekadasi itself, but extends to other Vaishnava vows like not only Janmashtami, but some other celebrations, Radhastami, Ramnavami, Shrinkha Chaturdasi, and others that are prescribed in scripture. Actually, Rupa Goswami mentioned them as part of his 64 angas of bhakti. Those who can be also followed in the context of Raga Bhakti in this case. And all these Vaishnava vows are considered eternal, as we mentioned, because they please Sri Hari, Sri Krishna, and he is eternal. And he's only pleased with those things that are eternal, that are of that same nature. Bhagavan Sri Krishna is not pleased with something of a temporary nature. So the point that it gives pleasure to him indicates their eternal nature. And that's why they are prescribed in Shastra. And Shastra is also eternal. So that's the point in this context. So let's give some context to what Vishwanath is mentioning here. First of all, something to notice is that according to certain Smarta section, they consider that fasting is more important than the aspect of worshiping Sri Hari, for example, in Ekadasi. They will make this emphasis. The fasting is the real thing, not worshiping Hari, fasting in Ekadasi. But actually for us, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, fasting means much more than just giving up some food. Actually, there's one interesting quote that it says that the fasting is not accomplished just by abstaining from some food, actually, but real fasting means giving up, fasting from all mundane activities and spending time in hearing and chanting holy names, attributes of Krishna. So that's a real fasting, not fasting only from food. Food in one sense represents that which sustains your material identity. That's a symbol, if you will, in this point. So all those activities that go around there, try to diminish them, to fast from them, and to give further time and energy on those days to further concentrate in the direction that really nurtures your real sense of self. That's a real meaning of Ekadasi, as Guru Raj was explaining recently when someone asked him, I think on the Janmashtami day, about the purpose of the fasting there. So he present fasting, the conception of fasting of upavas. Upavas, which means to reside near. Vas means implies residence, and upa has to do with closeness, close by too. So upavas means getting closer to Hari. In which sense, Hrishikena Hrishikesh Sivanam Bhakti Ruchite. That's the very definition of bhakti, one of them. So that means increase the use of your sense engagement in the context of giving pleasure to the master of your senses, Hrishikesh. That's the ideal standard of upavas, of Ekadasi, or of these days of celebrations. Actually, get absorbed in increasing your dedication, your tendency for giving pleasure to Hari. Sometimes Siddhasya Maharaj will give this, let's say, a prakrita explanation of Ekadasi. On one level, we have some devotees may just feel, oh, Ekadasi implies not eating grains. Unfortunately, some devotees are just aware of Ekadasi in order to not eat grains, to not fail in that sense. But we see that Vishwanath here is not just pointing to that. Be careful of not failing and eating grains. Papa Purush, personification of sin is there, and so on. That's in one sense a secondary consideration. Of course, in the lower sense, devotees may just be lamenting because they cannot eat their favorite food those days. That's a very lowly level of Ekadasi, and some other even lower will not be concerned about Ekadasi at all. But if you go to a higher conception of Ekadasi and a Prakrita conception, go to Vrindavan, and there we will see another idea. We'll see, okay, the idea Ekadasi and the grains, it is say that grains increase also is considered food, basically in India, in the Vedas, in the culture. If you don't have the grains, where's the food? So grains imply some strength coming, some weight entering your body and activating your senses even more. That's also the implication. So by not taking that, your senses are not being fed that much, activated that much, and you try to activate your senses in another direction. Also, Ekadasi has to do with the position of the moon. And the moon, of course, as you know, has to do with the mind. So in a particular days of Ekadasi, sometimes they say that the moon is a certain position, that mind receives certain agitation, and also the element water is connected to these days. And on these days, the water is more agitated. If you pay close attention to the oceans and so on, in Ekadasi, there will be certain extra movement there. And we have water in our bodies. 70% of whatever, approx, the constitution of the physical body is water. So in Ekadasi, the waters of our bodies are moving a little bit more intensely. So the fasting is recommended us to not further agitate those waters that are already agitated those days. So the Prakrita conception of this is, in Vrindavan, Krishna's bodily waters are becoming more agitated on those days. So Krishna is more prone to sense enjoyment. But of course, Krishna's sense enjoyment is totally transcendental and free of all totally selfless. That's the point. And it's our great fortune that he's more willing to enjoy those days because we can provide enjoyment, special enjoyment to him those days. Necessity is a matter of invention. So that's a moment of greater necessity. We will be able to receive greater, greater remuneration in the form of greater capacity to perform deeper seva. So that's the main point for us, the main conception for us as Gaudias regarding the Ekadasi. What's going on in Krishna's world, in Krishna's life, in Krishna's inner world, and what we can do in that connection, increase our serving disposition. And if you really get absorbed in that direction, you will forget about eating and sleeping. If you really get absorbed, like Raghunath Das or Bamsi Das. But in between, there are different proportions in that direction. So we should observe that in a realistic way according to our present situation. So in this way, the Vaishnavas follow the two parts. Now they abstain from grains on Ekadasi. Some of them, they abstain from food altogether. They take water, different standards. But mainly they will focus on this other aspect, which is worshiping Hari, especially on that day. And that's why actually Ekadasi, interestingly, is called Hari Vasara. Srila Rupa Goswami mentions like this in his Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu's list when he mentioned the 64 angas of bhakti. Ekadasi, I think, is like the 11th, so it's appearing almost right after the very first 10 ones who are considered important, or maybe it's in between the 10 ones. Now let me think about that for a while. It's in the first 10 practices. It's number 10, I think. Number 10. And he will consider, interestingly, he mentions in the Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu, preliminary bhakti preliminary bhakti, should consist of these 10 angas. So he gives special importance to those first 10 angas, and Ekadasi is one of them. And he doesn't name Ekadasi. He gives the name Sri Hari Vatsara, which has to do with the day of Sri Hari, the day of Krishna, twice a month. Of course, ideally, it will be every day and every moment of our lives, but let's begin with twice a month. Once a year, Janmashtami, twice a month, Hari Vatsara, Sri Ekadasi, and so on. So the point is that Hari should be worshipped. It's his day, so his day means some special worship will be there. Not only refraining from grains on Hari's day. So that's why Vishwanath is mentioning here, by observing the vow of Ekadasi, a partial relationship with the desired feeling is attained. With partial relationship, he speaks as bhava sambandhi, related to the cherished mood, but partial, like because of the upadana from nimitta karana, indirect cause, as we already explained. Partial, indirect, different ways of saying the same. So, but it's favorable because it's in the context of giving pleasure to Hari. The fasting will come, but ideally, certain level of fasting by absorbing in seva to the point even to forgetting about eating, or at least to forget that grains exist those days. So next, in the verse we quoted here, in the section we quoted, Vishwanath will quote Raga-vartma-candrika, which says, fasting on Ekadasi enables a human being to remember Govinda. So that again, he's mentioning something very positive and directly related with one's desired mood. This is coming from, again, Brahma-Vaivarta-purana, Smriti Shastras, law books, if you will, which clearly ascertain that one must fast on Ekadasi, at least from grains. And through that, again, in the context of what we explained Ekadasi means, you will attain the limb known as Smaran. This is what it said here in the Brahma-Vaivarta-purana. You will be able to remember Govinda. Remembrance implies Smaran. And Smaran has to do with a direct cause, the direct bhava sambandhi, upadana karana, as we already mentioned. So this indirect cause of the Ekadasi will promote the direct cause of the Smaran. So that's how this works, these two aspects of bhava sambandhi, nourishing the cherished mood. And so in this way, Ekadasi Vrat is described as partially related to the desired feeling, partial bhava sambandhi, indirect, but still bhava sambandhi. So again, fasting on Ekadasi calls remembrance of Govinda, not because of the fasting in itself, but because of the context of the fasting, of the devotional absorption, and so on. So in this way, Rupa Goswami mentions the importance of Ekadasi as, again, 10th limb, in the first part of the 10th limb, and he also will mention the observance of the other festivities mentioned here, like Janmashtami or Kartik. Kartik will be the topic of our next class. All these appear in the 64th list of Rupa Goswami, just right at the end, these two, Kartik, Janmashtami, and other festivals, right before the last 5 one, the Panchanga Bhakti, that finished the list of Sri Rupa Goswami. So in this way, Vishwanath gave Shastra Praman and shared the positive necessity of Ekadasi. What will happen if you do that? What will be the benefits? But as you know, we always generally need also the other side of the coin, the indirect approach. What will happen if you don't follow Ekadasi? As the scriptures say, always remember Krishna, never forget him. In this way, direct and indirect approach are complementary. So now he will share some strong quotes from scripture about the consequences of not following Ekadasi and what does it imply to not follow Ekadasi. He gives some really intense parallels. Negative incentive, basically, negative impetus he's trying to give. So Skanda Purana is saying a person who breaks Ekadasi, as I quoted there, becomes guilty of a sin equal to that of killing his mother, father, brother, or spiritual master. So you can think, oh, wow, that's heavy. I'm killing my Gurudev every time I do not follow him. Of course, now this also means, especially when you are aware that you have to follow it, as we mentioned already, and you are not doing that. And also there is some, I don't want to say exaggeration, but there is some intense emphasis here with the idea of trying to make it clear, although this is secondary in comparison to other things, this is not to be taken cheaply and to dismiss because we are fully engaged in Shravan Kirtan and so on. Of course, here it is mentioning things like killing one's spiritual master. Also, we should understand the language of the scriptures in that direction. The point is, by not following Ekadasi, you are committing aparad to Srinam in one sense. Sometimes the church mentioned that not only is a sin, it's a delicate thing, as we see. It's a very special day, Ekadasi. But it's also considered Gurura Bhakya. Gurura Bhakya is this is the third, Nama Parad, which has to do with doing away with the principle of the spiritual master, dismissing Guru Tattva. So that's why one way of saying killing the Guru, not necessarily means you are killing in every single sense of the term, but you are speaking about dismissing the Guru, which is aparat, which is still something very, very delicate. Now, killing could be a parallel with Bhakya. Because again, the point is the Guru is the one also prescribing this type of practices. So if the Guru is giving you an order or an instruction, and you are dismissing his instructions, basically you are dismissing the person behind the instruction. Of course, if you want to do that, and for any reason you were not able, again, intention is an important point here. But if you know you should do it, you know the reasons why, you have been instructed to do that, and even in the face of that, you choose not to do that, there is a particular intensive reaction, as we are saying. And if that's not enough, Vishwanath will quote the Vishnu Dharmottara, which says in the scriptures, one can find practices of atonement for sins, like killing a Brahmana, drinking alcohol, theft, or sexual intercourse with a superior. Sometimes they say with the Guru's wife. But no scripture mentions any atonement for the sin of eating grains and Ekadasi. So here, the situation is mainly in the context of Papa, seeing Ekadasi as Papa, and the Punya, or basically the credit one needs to acquire through certain atonement practice in order to transcend that sin. And here he's given very high examples of sinful activity. And say some things have been said in the scripture about what to do with that. But regarding the Ekadasi, of course, again, we are speaking in the context of sin, although Ekadasi has been connected with aparad in the previous section. But here, regarding sin, we could say, well, a devotee doesn't need to take shelter in certain atonement separate from her own endeavor in bhakti. And even if he engages in certain sin, whatever the sin, the only shelter is bhakti herself, the engagement in bhakti. So Ekadasi is part of bhakti. One could say engaging in bhakti, following Ekadasi properly with real repentant heart. Of course, there is a way to continue, even though in the context of karma and the sin and the piety and the atonement, it seems there is no stated formula as to how to counteract that. We are speaking in the context of bhakti and mercy. That's another law. But again, that's not to be abused as well. So that will depend, again, according to our precision, our sincerity. That will determine the particular reaction, if you will, that we have to go through. Because if we don't understand all this in this context, all these quotes sound very much more like more Vaidhi like than Raga-vartma-candrika. Vaidhi, like, if you don't do this, this will be the sin. If you fail doing this, following this rule, this will happen to you. And that was ideally dismissed in the beginning, and Raga Bhakti has to do with another thing. Of course, we cannot dismiss Vaidhi altogether from day one. So also all the things should be put in the proper consideration. But the idea with this is one which should should be free from doubt, that the vow of Ekadasi is surely to be observed, even though you consider that nimitta karana, indirect partial cause for attaining the desired feeling. That's a great necessity. And finally, let's finish by quoting the last part of the section I shared. Vishwanath is quoting the Skanda Purana, like trying to give a conclusion on this topic. He says, in the Skanda Purana it is said, people who do not abandon their Ekadasi fast, even in the presence of dreadful calamities or untold happiness, have attained Vaishnava initiation, Diksha, in the true sense. And, the second quote, anyone who offers all his activities to the lotus feet of Vishnu is a successful Vaishnava. Sorry, I didn't share that with you. I thought I did. I will share it here. That's there, sorry. So I was sharing. The second quote says, anyone who offers all his activities to the lotus feet of Vishnu is a successful Vaishnava. These two statements confirm that it is incumbent upon Vaishnavas to observe Ekadasi. It is forbidden for Vaishnavas to eat food which is not offered to the Lord, but on Ekadasi they are even prohibited from accepting Mahaprasad that contains grains. An offense is incurred even if such grains are taken unintentionally. So he's trying to get the point to a close, interestingly mentioning this idea of, he's quoting, for example, when Hari Bhakti Vilas is ascertained the characteristic of a Vaishnava, these two verses from the Skanda Purana are mentioning here in this context. One of them, the ones who do not abandon Ekadasi, even if you are receiving terrible calamities or incredible happiness, if you continue, that's considered you have attained Vaishnava initiation in the true sense. So you have to, in that sense, to play out what all that Ekadasi implies in the context of Diksha, of surrendering ourselves for Krishna's pleasure, and so on. And second, anyone who offers again all his activities to the lotus feet of Vishnu is a successful Vaishnava. He's not speaking about the Ekadasi overtly, but this is what the Ekadasi is really about, ultimately. In that sense, we should perform Ekadasi every single day. But these Ekadasi days are special remindings, fortnightly reminders about this point, offering all our activities for the pleasure of Bhagavan. That was it means to be a Vaishnava. Engaging our senses in our sadhaka deha. Let bhakti samskars be poured in every hole, every pore of our being, of our sadhaka deha. That's what really Ekadasi is about. That's what Diksha is about. That's what being a Vaishnava is about. And that's why Ekadasi is called the day of Hari. It's not just fasting, but it's a special reminder about who you are expected to become in the context of your relationship with your Lord. And hopefully that fortnightly reminder, you are able to sustain that for the following 2 weeks. And when you are about to forget about that, the new Ekadasi is coming. Something like this. So we should really take these things seriously, not only cheaply and just thinking about, I have to cook something different today. So finally, Vishwanath is referring to those people who may say, there's no fault. Okay, I accept that, but there's no fault in eating Mahaprasad grains on Ekadasi. Those grains are transcendental. It's Mahaprasad, the great mercy of the Lord. So they should always be honored, served, venerated. It is a fault to give up Mahaprasad. But Vishwanath is trying to make that point clear, because some people do that. Or may say, where the Brajavasis in eternal, in Nitya Vrindavan in Golok, they're not following Ekadasi. So we should do that. No, we are to follow, in that sense, the footsteps of those Brajavasi when they appear in the Gaur Lila, Rupa, Sanatan, and so on, and they are following Ekadasi. So that's why on Ekadasi, if we offer prasad bhoga to the deity in the altar, we do not offer the grains to the parampara, but only to the deity. Or I have heard also sometimes they offer to the parampara in the idea of seeing the guru as Krishna. I mean, the side of the equation that the guru is Krishna, he's taken that. But in the case of his sadhaka side, if you will, they are not following this. So that's why Vishwanath here is saying, Vaishnavas never eat food which is not offered to the Lord, just in case he makes that point. Because it's an important point. It's not only about not eating grains on Ekadasi, it's about eating Mahaprasad hopefully every single day of our life, and understanding that when we are eating something that is not offered, well, that's creating a certain result. It's not Krishna himself saying that's in the Bhagavad Gita strongly. He says, whoever is eating something not offered to the Lord, that person is only eating sin, karma, because it's not offered, it's not sanctified, there's not divine intervention in that context. So that will affect our practice some level or another, at least for those beginning ones. Again, if you are speaking about Vishwanath Chakravarti, Vamsidas Bhavaji, Prabhupada, someone giving chocolate to Guru Maharaj, that's nothing. So we should, as Sridhar Maharaj will say, we shouldn't imitate our Guru, and he will say, I am more strict than my Guru Maharaj because I'm not on his level. So I need to be more strict. So each one will have to find the proper point of balance, that not in a neurotic sense, of course. So here Vishwanath is making that point clear. Vaishnavas never eat food which is not offered, and therefore, and also the meaning is that in the context of Ekadasi, they renounce Mahaprasad externally. They won't take the grains, but internally they are accepting the offering. There's one Leela with Mahaprabhu receiving Mahaprasad on Ekadasi with grains, so he takes that to his head, accepting, honoring Mahaprasad in that sense. Because actually we are not speaking in terms of eating Mahaprasad, but honoring that, in the proper attitude. So he did that, but he didn't break the vow of eating grains in Ekadasi. So in this way, all things related to Hari, Ekadasi is the day of Hari, but all things related to Hari have total inconceivable potency. Of course, the ultimate culmination, converging point of that is the attainment of Hari himself in a particular cherished mood. So the point is, we should know Ekadasi is very special vow in that direction, and we shouldn't compare Ekadasi, which is a topmost special vow, with other vows that make people take in this world to attain totally insignificant goals in the material worlds and so on. To do that comparison and to make the mistake of seeing Jessica as one more vow, that's a very delicate also offense. So tomorrow we have Ekadasi, so it's a nice preliminary function for meditating. So almost done. Let me finish just making a brief recap of terms, since I don't want you to get lost in the jungle of conceptions. So Vishwanath is speaking here about these 5 divisions, engagements in bhajan, if you will. First, we have gone through last class, Swabhishta Bhavamai, which means that particular cherished mood that we will have. So that what does it mean? Two things we could say about that. I forgot to mention that. But in the stage of sadhana, as a sadhaka, that means you're trying to absorb in your internal identity. Of course, you are so as a sadhaka, but also as much as you can, as much as your adhikar allows, you will be absorbed in your cherished mood, in your projection of identity as a gopi, gopa, while still having a material body, while still being a sadhaka, on some level or another. And in the siddha stage, of course, that will mean you will actually become that, a gopi or gopa. So that has to do with Swabhishta Bhavamai, saturated with one's cherished mood. But in both cases, it will be Swabhishta Bhavamai. And next we have this Swabhishta Bhava Sambandhi, those practices which are related to one's cherished mood and are divided in 2 parts, Upadana Karana and Nimitta Karana, direct cause, indirect cause. Direct cause, we saw that last class, speaking about Shravan, Kirtan, taking shelter of the Guru, and these are activities to be performed on an ongoing basis on a daily standard. And ideally, this practice shouldn't be neglected for any reason. It's part of our daily food, daily air, daily life. And then we have the practices seen today, which are called Swabhishta Bhava Sambandhi, also, but of the type of Nimitta Karana. The others are Swabhishta Bhava Sambandhi Upadana Karana. So the Nimitta Karana are the indirect or partial causes, which, again, if we cannot follow them under certain circumstances, it may not be harmful, and therefore they are considered secondary in that sense. But again, we shouldn't use this as an excuse, but we should mainly focus on their favorable role in nourishing the more direct practice. As we say, Ekadasi brings remembrance, and that will nourish our cherished mood, our main ideal in our Raga Marg Bhajan. So I will stop today here, and next class of Monday, we'll continue with this verse still, and we'll continue elaborating on this second part of these 5 engagements in bhajan, on this Swabhishta Bhava Sambandhi. So I will finish here, but of course, if you have any questions, any commentary, doubt, whatever, we have some minutes for that as well.
Dandavat Maharaj. I have a couple of comments, if I'm allowed.
Yes.
The first is about Vrata, Vaishnava Vratas. You mentioned a few following Anantadas Babaji's commentary, Ramanavami, Nishinga Chaturdasi, Radhastami.
Mm-hmm.
But for Sarasvata Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Radhastami is not a Vrata day.
Mm-hmm.
And the point I'm saying this is because people sometimes...
By Vrata day, you imply fasting?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is that many people get confused about what they call Ekadashi Prasadam.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very unfortunate term that we speak about Ekadashi Prasadam because it confuses people. Instead, we should speak about fasting Prasadam.
Mm-hmm.
Because all these Vrata days, Ekadashi, Janmastami, Ramanavami, and so on, we fast on all these days. And if we can't fast completely, then we take fasting Prasadam, which means without grains and pulses.
Anukalpa,
So that's
sometimes, right?
Yes, yeah. So that's what's common for all these days. And some Vaishnavas also fast on, some Gaudiyas also fast on Radhastami.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Radhakund.
Okay.
But Bhaktisiddhanta, he taught not to fast on that day.
I think mainly because the fasting is considering connection to Vishnu Tattva and not so much Shakti Tattva, right?
Yes, and his point was that if we would fast on Shakti Tattva days, then since Vaishnavas in one sense are part of Shakti Tattva, every day would be a fasting day.
Yeah, yeah. And also in that direction, I would add, and you tell me, but sometimes devotees fast on the appearance day or disappearance day of Vaishnavas, but following this point, this is not to be done, but because they are considered in the context of Bhakti Shakti Tattva. Of course, there are also Shakti Tattva in the sense of Jiva Shakti, but mainly Bhakti Shakti. But fasting shouldn't be there in the appearance on disappearance day of Vaishnavas. Am I correct? What do you think?
Yes, yes. I mean, there can be, maybe you're so focused on the seva that you don't have time for breakfast or something like that.
Of course.
But there will be ordinary prasadam on those days.
Yeah.
Then the other point is kind of a historical point that Vishwanath Chakravarti, he's keeping some Vaishnavas in mind sometimes in Raga-vartma-candrika. Like, for example, when he wrote about serving in the Siddharupa and the Sevaka Rupa, in his time, there were some Vaishnavas, particularly one Rupa Kaviraja, who thought that this verse should be understood in the way that you should serve in the same way with the outer body and the same way with the inner body. So they would dress up like gopis and so on. In this place, he's thinking about the followers of Hit Harivansh, most probably.
Who do not follow Ekadasi.
Yes, because for the reason that he's saying that some people. So we might be surprised when we read such a heavy thing here about Ekadashi, but I think it's because some people in his particular context, they were preaching like this, so that's why he had to kind of say these heavy things.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the addition and Desha Kalapatra consideration that are always very, to go into the detail of what's going on there. Thank you very much. So no question today, but full of commentaries, Brigupad. So thank you very much. Something else someone may like to share? Questions, commentaries, contributions of whatever type? Okay, so I think we are done for today. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, and may you have a very nice Ekadasi tomorrow, and we'll see each other next Monday. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premananda Hari Bol.
Shri Srimad Bhakti Pranaya Padmanabha Maharaj ki jai.
Vansakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Hari Bol.